school programme.
The last 5 years, the population, the ethnic minorities, if you like, on the Isle of Dogs, changed dramatically. It's gone up from something like 0.2% in 1980 to 20% of the population. Now that's a tremendous change, and a very, very quick and noticeable change. And of course people say, well, we're being pushed out. Already they feel they're being pushed out by the LDDC, they're being pushed out by nameless authority that have always threatened them. And then on top of that, of course, comes this sudden influx of easily identifiable strangers amongst young people. There isn't that difference that my generation feels alienated, because in fact the people don't speak our language. We can't converse with them, and they're so obviously different. But in fact, in the schools, of course, the kids play together, and they tend to speak the same language. The real problem is whether we adults, and particularly the older generation of the adults, don't force our prejudices upon those youngsters.
The playground is where the values and influence of the school meet those of the communities it serves. The encounter isn't always an easy one. It's a stronghold of pupil cultures, where teacher doesn't always rule okay. It's a place where perhaps parents feel more empowered to intervene and have their say than over classroom matters. That's why it's so important to recognise the complexities of what goes on. Through their play, children stage their own version of adult dramas of gender, race and class, rephrasing them in the language of inner conflicts and desires. But they aren't simply rehearsing parts that have already been written for them. They're also actively scripting the future.
If you don't get the playground right, you won't get the national curriculum right either, because the spin-off from the playground can be absolutely devastating in the classroom.
Could you perhaps elaborate a bit on that from your own experience?
Well, I know that as a head teacher, I've spent whole afternoons mopping up the aftermath of a bad lunchtime. I know that the class teachers find that when they've had a bad playtime, settling them down to work, sorting out the remnants of the fight that's been carried back in, or the argument, or the name-calling incident, or whatever it is, into the classroom again, takes up valuable teaching time. So it's crucial that we get playtimes and out-of-class times right. It's also an opportunity for children to be it should be part of their learning day.
There was a fight in the playground between a boy called Terry and a boy called Jason. And also, the fight was over a game called Champ. We had to catch the ball. If you dropped, you were out. Now, Jason loved this game. It was his favourite. And Terry was determined to spoil it for him. Terry was definitely out. And Terry said he wasn't. And Terry just stood there. Jason pushed him to tell him he was out. Terry got angry over this and called him a name and pushed him. Then Jason was very offended of the name. And then he pushed him back. They both started fighting on the grass. Everybody crowded around. There was lots of violence and they were rolling all over the grass, getting mucky and dirty. Suddenly somebody had a swipe in the face and the fight began. They were kicking each other, punching each other, rolling all over the grass. Everybody crowded around. Then teacher finally came to the rescue and stopped the fight. The fight was quite long and Jason won. Terry was crying. This is how most fights begin. over games and over people cheating. Terry was out and he just couldn't take it.
The fight raises many questions. Is this a racist incident? What would make it so? Is the body language universal or specific to a particular culture of masculinity? What are the unwritten rules of this fight? Is it best understood as a piece of street theatre or as a preview of Rocky VI? If so, who gets to play Stallone? Or perhaps we have to look at its more intimate meanings, the history of the relationship between these two boys, and of the black and Irish communities to which they belong. Are we, for example, witnessing an encounter between two different fighting traditions? What then is the wider significance of Jason's triumph? One thing is for sure, we'll never find out by sticking to a vantage point of adult superiority and surveillance. This angle on the fight not only turns us into voyeurs, but conceals as much as it reveals about the meaning of what is going on.
We do have one or two upsets. I think you may get a little bit of racist come out if they actually argue with their friend who is black. But it only comes out when they're having an argument, which would happen between two white children just the same. If there were two white children arguing, then you'd get a swear word. But if there were black and white, you'd get a racist. And it, quite honestly, I don't think that there's any difference at all, really. They don't mean, if they say anything nasty about that, I don't think they really feel that they're saying it because they are black. They're saying it because they've had that argument with that child and they know they can hurt by saying that sort of thing.
Teachers tend to say that name calling is so predominant that, you know, we don't need to take it seriously. It's a fact of life. We shouldn't, you know, there's nothing to deal with. And, you know, maybe say that that doesn't deal with the fact that there are certain pupils who get name called more seriously than others, and that some of the name calling is more serious than other. And that we've got to learn to distinguish what's going on. We've got to learn to read the situations. And also the link that there is between name-calling and other forms of bullying and harassment, and that the pupils made that connection again and again. That it's very rare that you get a fight starting without name-calling first, for instance, and it's part of the build-up. And so we have to learn to read name-calling.
That time, they call him a black bastard, and that was a very, very annoying one, but I don't take it. I don't take much offense in that. Well, it's annoying to hear that, and I told the teacher in charge, you know, and she tried to rectify things by talking to the parents.
Call me like, if I say I've got sausage plaits in my hair, if I call me silly names like that, but I'll just ignore it. But when they call me racist names, I'll go and tell the teacher. Because silly names like that, I'm not really bothered like that, but with the racism words, I'm bothered.
How do you feel about it?
It gets me upset inside.
It's very important to remember that if we're talking about name-calling and victims, we're not just talking about the name-caller and the victims, we're actually talking about other pupils who are observing and hearing, and who are learning whether or not these issues are going to be dealt with. And it can be a profoundly disturbing, negative experience to watch some extremely unfair, unjust behaviour in school, to wish that somebody's going to do about it, and nothing to happen. And this leaves often feelings of guilt in the pupils who observe what has happened, and powerlessness, that they did not know how to do anything about it.
Well, it's the other kids going up, and they fight. Poking, you know, touching being horrible, verbally. I think verbally as well can be the pits. And that can also, apart from the physical side of it, it's the verbal, you know, the nasty name calling, all that sort of thing. That's bad here.
What did you do about that?
What can you do? What can you do? My attitude is, if the children go up and hit you, you just sock them back, girl. First day here was the most dreadful day of all our lives, including her father's as well, I think, and he didn't even know nothing about it. And we was walking home, and she said that a couple of kids had come up and hit her, and my instant reaction, I'm afraid, is hit them back. And the little girl was walking along in front of me, who I have never seen before, never seen, I didn't know who she was, and she turned around and she said, that's exactly what my mum tells me to do, because if you go to the staff in this school, nobody takes a blind bit notice. Her teacher says she does, but her teacher's not always out on playground duty. And the kiddies all come up and say, if anything happens, go and tell somebody. Well, somebody doesn't really give a toss, to be quite frank with you. I don't care who they are. None of them seem to do anything. So my answer now is hit them back.
Sometimes as well, they get injured by the elbow or, you know, get a mark, you know. Well, now ask them, how did you get the mark? Since on the playground, you know. If it's a very big injury, I do talk to the teacher in charge of the my boys, just to talk to them about what happened the previous day, you know. And then we just ask the person who has caused the injury, you know, to discuss with the parents as well, you know, to rectify things.
If they haven't got enough to do out there, or games are not organised out there, they do get bored, and that is when the fights start. I know for a fact that I've always played rounders, but I found that if anyone was fighting and I spotted them, I'd go over and say, no more fighting, you can play rounders. And I find that the majority of children that play rounders get that out of their system because they can bash a ball and they can run, and it takes it all off. I'm sure that's a lot to do with it.
I'm a mother, and my instant reaction is, if my one little girl is hitting the other little girl, I know what I do at home. Teachers can't do that. You can't do anything these days. You cannot do a thing without some silly little parent come screaming along, shouting, you shouldn't do that to my child. So therefore everything goes out the wall. I don't know what the answer is, but all I know is that somebody somewhere has got to do something. And it's no good going to the headmistress, because her answer is, you mustn't tell the children to hit back and we will do something. But they never do. Because if you go to a lot of the children in the school, both in the infants and in the juniors, it goes on. And nobody seems to listen to the children.
It's very difficult responding sensitively to a parent who has a view that is very different from that of the school. And there are many parents who believe that their children should be taught to defend themselves, to hit back, not to go, telling tales, because they're then being weak, they will be bullied as a result. This actually isn't how I see it at all, and I recognise why the parents are doing this. It's because very often they are aware of the dangers outside of school that children are encountering, and they want to make sure their children are tough enough to deal with them. The problem is, in my view, that a child who hits back is inviting being hit in return again. And where does it stop? It goes on and escalates until somebody really does get hurt. And it may be that mother's child, or it may be the other one. We cannot deal with life like that as adults. If we thumped everybody who irritated us in the street, we'd not last long. And I don't think it's very helpful ultimately to their children to be training them in this way. But I cannot impose my view on parents. I do feel that as a school we have to insist that this is the rule within the boundaries of the school, and try to do everything we can to explain the pitfalls of hitting back, etc., to parents.
It is important for adults to enter the world of the pupils and to understand what is actually going on in the vocabulary. The only way that can be done is by finding a way to talk together. And I think that a number of different methods are being tried. For instance, it can be that in one specific discussion session, it is agreed that for this occasion and this occasion only, that the teacher in the classroom, the pupils are free to use whatever language they think is appropriate, and there will be no sanction against that, so that the words can be explored. It can also be to ask pupils which words they think should be banned. That would be another approach. But it has to be in partnership with the pupils, in my view. For adults generally, there is a massive silence about racial issues. And there's a deep fear that if you actually engage in any use of racially descriptive language, that you are immediately racist.
One of the things that we wanted to do was to be very open with parents about what we were doing with bullying, name-calling and all those other sorts of things, and in sharing our policies and our policy making, both for behaviour and equal opportunities, because the two go very much hand in hand, with parents. We've been very honest with them about the sorts of things that were happening and what we were doing about it. It's had a kickback. There has been a parental complaint which makes reference to the fact that the school has a history of bullying and racism. Well, of course it does, but all schools do. The thing that we have done is to acknowledge that it exists and try to do something about it, and try to involve parents in partnership in doing it.
I more and more become persuaded of the idea of a whole school approach, which means that pupils and all staff, teachers, all the ancillary staff are actually involved in understanding how to create a safe and positive environment within the school boundaries and when the pupils are going home, which is one that people will look back on as being a context in which problems were dealt with.
Everyone is against bullying, fighting and name-calling, and most schools have policy statements against racism. Yet despite so many good intentions and interventions, these practices continue. We need to look in greater detail and depth at the processes involved, without assuming that any group of pupils has a monopoly of discrimination, or that there's any one right way to do anti-racist work. How can we link what we do in the classroom to the kinds of playground issues that this programme has dealt with? What kinds of democratic structures can be developed in the school so that the sort of differences which we've seen emerge can be worked through in an atmosphere free from recrimination? How can the social skills which children draw on to resist the culture of racism be developed and built upon? These are some of the issues which we'll be addressing in the second programme.
Some of the white boys start to cuss my colour. They call me nigger and blackie and names like that. It makes me very angry. I know they're just doing it to pick a fight. Some people just tell them to shut up, but I don't say shut up, I say grow up.